All right, so this evening we're in Matthew chapter 14, and we're picking up where we left off Sunday morning, looking at verses 13 and 14. When Jesus heard it, now what did he hear? Let's back up here. He heard about the death of John the Baptist. I just want to make sure that we're aware of that. That was the last thing we were looking at. And John's disciples came and told Jesus, excuse me. So when Jesus heard it, he departed from there by boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the multitudes heard it, now they heard about, Jesus was leaving, basically. They followed him on foot from the cities. And when Jesus went out, he saw a great multitude, and he was moved with compassion for them and healed their sick. And I may have kind of misspoke there. It says, but when the multitudes heard it, I guess they heard about John as well, and then they saw Jesus' reaction. But nonetheless, they were following Jesus, of course. That was the point. So when Jesus heard of John's death, what did he try to do? Or what was his intent to do? It was to get out on his own, right? Go to a deserted place, escape, get off to himself. But what happened, actually?
Hey, let's go find Jesus.
The people followed him, right? They followed him. It says they followed him on foot from the cities. So that's kind of odd to think about, but I guess depending on how they went over the water, over the lake, that would be easy to do. So let's see. Now this, and when Jesus went out, we're going to get a little clearer picture of this from the other accounts. But this is when he's exiting the boat. He's exiting the boat, and the people are there. There's a group of people already there. So now, what prompted Jesus to heal the sick, and also to feed the hungry later, but to heal the sick here? This is our workbook question number 6, actually. Yes, Matt? Compassion, right? Yeah, so he had compassion on them, and he healed them, and then later we know he also fed them, another sign of his compassion for people. So notice that Jesus did not grump or complain about the people. Here he came for some private time, trying to get away, trying to have some prayer time, and he didn't get it. I know sometimes when we have a plan like that and things interrupt and interfere, we can get kind of grumpy. Oh, well, okay, I'll speak for myself. I can get kind of grumpy, right? So that's just to be fair. It can happen. So instead of doing what he wanted, though, and taking care of himself and having that prayer time, he took care of them. So we need to be sure that we respond in that same way. He's setting these examples for us, even just these little examples here, though. It's a pretty big deal that he healed their sick, though. I wasn't trying to make light of that. But instead of doing what we want, we should help those who have come to us for help, right? Even if it kind of interrupts us or interferes with what we thought we were going to do or wanted to do. So the main reason is that we're here to serve and not to be served, just like Jesus. And sometimes we have to think about it. If someone comes to you and they're wanting to talk to you, say, about the Lord or something, and you delay them, sometimes a chance to talk to somebody like that, if you delay it or put it off, it's gone forever. So in some instances, it's really, really very important that we take that idea to heart, that when people come to us, that we try to help them, especially in a spiritual way about the Lord or anything like that. So we want to make sure that we have that right mindset for that. That's more important than our momentary need or want. So, all right. So we will see him get this prayer time later, though. Let's look at Mark's account here. Mark's account in chapter 6, verse 30 through 34. Then the apostles gathered to Jesus and told him all things, both what they had done and what they had taught. Now here they're referring to, again, what we talked about before. The apostles had been gone doing their mission that Jesus had sent them on. And they were just coming back. He still had other disciples with him through the other things we talked about up to this point. So there's a gap there where the apostles are actually not there. but his other disciples are still with him. So, but here, the apostles have returned, and he said to them, "Come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while." For there were many coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. So they departed to a deserted place in the boat by themselves. But the multitude saw them departing, and many knew him, and ran there on foot from all the cities. They arrived before them and came together to him. And Jesus, when he came out, saw a great multitude, and was moved with compassion for them, because they were like sheep not having a shepherd. So he began to teach them many things. So we see other reasons why Jesus also wanted them to go off to a deserted place, right? Why did he tell them, let's go off somewhere else? So that they could rest, right? See, they had just come back from that mission, hadn't even had a chance to eat, so he's trying to get them also a chance to rest. He wants to take time, I know, to go pray and everything, but he's also trying to give his apostles a chance to catch a break. So, and then we look at, let's see, there was something else here I wanted to mention. Oh, and it tells, if you look at verse 34, how did Jesus see the crowd? How did he see the people? Yes, Carolyn.
Like a shepherd that would see the sheep without someone to care for them.
Right. He's seeing the sheep. He's seeing the people as sheep without any shepherd, right? And we know he's the great shepherd, but in this case, he's seeing them. They're leaderless. They're kind of directionless. Yeah, they're lost. They're lost. That's great. Yeah, they're lost. Shirley?
I just wanted to say, these verses are indicating that the people outran Jesus where he was going.
They got there first. That's what I was kind of hinting at earlier.
Kind of visualize them, just a whole multitude of people running as fast as they could to get to where he was going.
I thought it was kind of weird, but, well, you know what? I've got a map. Let me see how far away we are. See, this is 23. Okay.
He was in a boat.
All right, so
on foot.
here we got a map. Now, I'm assuming he's coming from somewhere over this way, and he's just going over, I'm sorry, my hand is shaking a little bit. He's just going over towards Bethsaida over there. He's just going over on the other side. He's just going like maybe from here to there, and so they ran out, and I don't know on their boat, if maybe the wind wasn't great, so they weren't going very fast, and they were just able to beat him there. It's possible. People can move quickly when they want to, so. But yeah, I thought that was odd too. But yeah, they knew where he was going, and they actually beat him to the place. How they knew exactly where he was going, I'm not sure of, but maybe they overheard them speaking about where they were going. And now, Luke mentions this as well. And the apostles, when they returned, told him all that they had done. That's what I'm talking about. He mentions the fact that the apostles at this point had returned as well. Then he took them and went aside privately into a deserted place belonging to the city called Bethsaida. So they're over there very near Bethsaida. They may be out of town, but they're still pretty close. But when the multitudes knew it, they followed him, and he received them and spoke to them about the kingdom of God and healed those who had need of healing. So, well, that answers our question here, because Luke mentions that they're near Bethsaida. We may not have the exact location, but we know they're near Bethsaida, which is on that east side of the upper portion of the Lake of Galilee that we were just looking at. So, now before this, the last I think we really knew for sure exactly where Jesus was he was around the general Nazareth area, but obviously by this point, let's see, where's Nazareth? Here. So this was the last place we definitely knew where he was, and then he was going to preach in a circuit around certain villages, and we don't know exactly where those were. Yes?
You you've got Sepphoris just north of Nazareth. That's what I was talking about a week or so ago when Jesus
That's
lived
right.
near Sepphoris.
This was a little better map. I found this by accident, and I was like, hey, that's a little better map. So you'll probably see more of this map in the future. It's a little better map for around Galilee here. And yeah, that's Sepphoris. Yeah, you're right. And it's between Cana and Nazareth. So they're over here now on this side somewhere. I think they're, if I had to, we're going to read more about it, but I think they're like over on this side of the town, and I think we'll see that in a few minutes, or at least we'll get an indication of that. It's not 100% definite, okay? So what things? Okay. Oh, what things does Luke say that Jesus did for the multitude besides the healing? We knew about the healing, right? Yes, ma'am.
Spoke to them about the kingdom of God.
That's right.
He's always doing that.
He received them, which means basically he welcomed them, but he spoke to them about the kingdom, which is what he's doing, all the time. That's his mission. And so he spoke to them about the kingdom. So this is kind of a combination of what we see in Matthew and Mark in ways, Luke's account, which is good. Now, if we look at John, because all four Gospels mention a lot of this event here, because all of this is about feeding of the 5,000. So in John chapter 6, verses 1 and 2, after these things, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias, that is another name for it. Then a great multitude followed him because they saw his signs which he performed on those who were diseased. So John's is a shorter version, but the same basic idea. What reason does John give for them following him? The signs, right? Because of the healing. So, and John's the only one that really mentions that. So we see multiple reasons for that Jesus went and the apostles went, and we see several reasons why the multitude were following as well. So, and later in this chapter of John, the motives of some of the people will be more explored, but we're not going to get into that because we're staying to Matthew, right? But when we get to John, we'll go back into that. But Matthew, coming back to our verses, Jesus sets this good example for responding to the people's needs, both healing and teaching them. Is there anything else on these two verses? Okay. I've kind of broken this up into little pieces as we go through this because we're kind of cycling through all four of the Gospels. If we look at verses 15 through 18, when it was evening, his disciples came to him saying, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is already late. Send the multitudes away that they may go into the villages and buy themselves food." But Jesus said to them, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "We have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish." He said, "Bring them here to me." So what are the problems that the disciples see in this situation? Yeah, there's not enough food, right? There's not enough food for all these people. There's not enough food. We're not in a place where they can just get food, like we're not in an orchard or near a garden or anything like that. They're in a wilderness area and the hour is late, right? Now, is this a valid concern? Yeah, I think so, because some of these people, I don't know how far they might have to walk, right? And if they're hungry, we don't know, how they might be feeling. We just don't know. So hunger could be a real issue if you need to walk a few hours to find a town. And if it's late, you might not even be able to eat till the next day. There could be problems with that. So how does Jesus respond to this? He tells them to give them something to eat, right?
Which is kind of puzzling.
Which is, I think it's kind of funny, but he has a point. I always believe Jesus has a point. He's challenging them. He's testing them to see how they will respond. And, how do we answer Jesus in that type of thing? If we think about today, there are people hungry today in the world, even probably in our community. How do we respond to that need? Do we, we need to make sure that we're responding to those things as well. And we know that's going on all over the world and even locally and close to us. So, how did the disciples answer Jesus, though?
Apparently they've done some inventory.
Yeah, obviously they checked around, right? They checked everybody's lunchbox or whatever, basket or whatever they had. And all they had was these 5 loaves and 2 fish. They're like, this is all we got. So this picture kind of represents the idea, except for the fact the fish would actually have been prepared to eat. Because this was most likely somebody's, it was either a family's little lunch or one or two persons' little lunch. Oh wait, actually it's a boy's lunch. Either that or he's carrying it for his family. But nonetheless, because I remember now that a little boy actually has this. He has this bread and these fish, and the fish would have been prepared to eat. They would have been either dried or pickled or something like that. They wouldn't be raw like that with the heads on and not cleaned or anything. So, all right. So I had to say that because I looked at that and I said I would not eat those fish. So, but obviously this was somebody's lunch or something like that for the day. It wasn't really enough for this number of people. Let's see. Oh, okay. And then what does Jesus say about this food?
Give it to me.
Yep, bring it to me, give it to me. Right? He's going to take care of it. So we know Jesus, and of course it's easy for us because we've read this before. We know Jesus is preparing to do a miracle. And I wonder what the disciples actually expected or thought. I just wonder. There's no answer for that. I just wonder. So if we look at Mark's account, chapter 6, verses 35 through 38. When the day was now far spent, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and already the hour is late. Send them away that they may go into the surrounding country and villages and buy themselves bread, for they have nothing to eat." But he answered and said to them, "You give them something to eat." And they said to him, "Shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give them something to eat?" But he said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." And when they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. So there's definitely some similarities here to Matthew, not exactly the same. We wouldn't expect it to be exactly the same. One thing to note in verse 36 is that, let's see, the King James Version and the New King James Version say, "For they have nothing to eat." However, some of the manuscripts seem to actually say that they may go and buy something to eat. So there's a little confusion maybe on that, and there may just be a slight, I forget what you call it, just a slight error on a manuscript or something because they used a different set of manuscripts for the King James Version originally than what we have nowadays.
Are you showing us New King James here?
This is New King James, and it says, "For they have nothing to eat," there in verse 36 at the end. And the manuscripts we look at nowadays that I think most of our translations come from say that they may go and buy something to eat. But here it says buy themselves bread. It was kind of confusing to look at that, but this kind of doubles, well, anyway, I've forgotten now. Hold on. But the implication was still that they didn't have anything to eat. Whether they have that, for they haven't. Oh, I remember I said that wrong. Okay, I've confused myself. I apologize. So the other manuscripts stopped with the fact that they could go buy themselves something to eat. It didn't have this, for they have nothing to eat. And it seems like in the King James, they just wanted to explain why they would go get something to eat, that they added this, for they have nothing to eat. Yeah. So the implication was because they had to go buy something to eat, that they had nothing to eat. So in those translations, they just wrote that out to make it very clear that they needed to be able to go get something to eat. And of course, they were fairly close to Bethsaida, which was a town where they could hopefully go and get something to eat, right? I think we can kind of understand that. And then that was just one little thing that I noticed in some of the translations and things that I was looking at. Even though I'm sorry I did not explain it the best at first. I should have made a better note, I guess. But what else is different here in these verses, though, that we notice? Yes.
Verse 37, shall we go and buy them? I think
Yeah.
that's the new question there.
Yeah, verse 37, the disciples are like, can we spend 200 denarii? Now that's 200 days of work. That's a lot of money by anybody's standard, because that's more than half a year's work right there. That's a lot of money. So could they spend 200 days of wages, and to get that much bread and give them something to eat? That was the question, and that seems like a lot. And two, would they even be carrying around that much money on them? Most likely not. I don't know what that would be like or weigh like, but I kind of doubt it. I know I don't normally carry around over half a year's money on me. I can tell you that. I don't think I've ever carried that much money on me. So let's look at Luke. Luke chapter 9, verses 12 and 13. When the day began to wear away, the 12 came and said to him, send the multitude away, that they may go into the surrounding towns and country and lodge and get provisions, for we are in a deserted place here. But he said to them, you give them something to eat. And they said, we have no more than 5 loaves and 2 fish, unless we go and buy food for all these people. So here again, they're thinking like any of us would think, well, I've got to go to McDonald's or somewhere and get you something, I guess, because I don't have it. And you might notice they added an extra concern here. They actually talked about and lodge, so have a place to sleep, I guess, out of the wilderness. They need shelter. Now, and who brought the concern to him here?
12.
The 12, right, the 12. You notice it specifically says the 12. So the apostles brought this concern. So Luke is more narrowly defining who brought this to Jesus, not just random disciples. So, because we know there were other disciples. So that's just a little more information. Let's look at John. If we look at John chapter 6, verses 5 through 9. Then Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing a great multitude coming toward him, he said to Philip, where shall we buy bread that these may eat? But this he said to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, there is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish, but what are they among so many? So here John is giving us some more details. Who does John interact with? Who does Jesus interact with here in this account? Philip and Andrew, right? So he's interacting with them. It reads a little differently the way John has it written, but all the elements, everything is still there. Let's see. Oh, and let's see. So what does Philip say about buying the food here? Matt?
The 200 denarii is enough.
Right. Even if they bought that, the way he says it, every one of them may have a little. Like they would not have much food, but they would, spending that much money, they could get all of them a little. If you think of like a bite or something, and that just would not be sufficient for grown people. So then, who finds the loaves and the fish actually here, or seems to find them from what he says here? Well, Andrew finds the boy that has the fish, right? So, because he says there's a lad here. So, and then What does Andrew imply about these loaves and this fish here? In the way he says this.
It's not very much.
It's meaningless, right? Yeah, it's not very much. It's meaningless to this crowd. It's just, it's almost like worthless, but not, it says, what is this to so many people, right? So we come back to our verses, and we see that the apostles, they took this challenge seriously, but did not know how to solve the issue themselves. They needed help from the Lord. And Jesus is our source to solve every issue and every problem. And we can see again here that by ourselves, we're incomplete. We can't take care of these things. We need the Lord because we're not up to the task. But Jesus will take whatever we have, as little as we may think it is, and He will make it enough. So you notice Jesus does not put down that little bit of food like we might be tempted to do like Andrew. He doesn't put it down. Instead, He says, give it to me. Give me what you got. I'll work with that. So, and that's one thing we should remember, that the Lord can always use whatever we do have. Anything else on these verses? Yes, Donna?
Isn't Mark the only one that shows that Jesus told him to go and see what they had?
I think Mark probably was. Let's just back up a second. Let's see. He says, you give them something to eat. He said, go and see. Yes. He's the only one that told them to look and see what they had. Yeah. Mark actually includes that. The other accounts don't really say it that way. Yeah. Because Jesus had said, you give them something to eat. But right. So Mark's account was the only one that actually has Jesus telling them, go and see what you have, what we have, food-wise. Yeah. Anything else? Okay, so if we look at the next verses 19 through 21, then He, this being Jesus, then He commanded the multitudes to sit down on the grass, and He took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, He blessed and broke and gave the loaves to the disciples, and the disciples gave to the multitudes. So they all ate and were filled, and they took up 12 baskets full of the fragments that remained. Now those who had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. So if we look at question number 7 in the workbook, how many were fed?
5,000 men, and then whatever women and children would have been along with them, I guess.
Right, over 5,000. Now I did read some things that said probably there wouldn't have been a lot of women and children because they were out in the wilderness, but they're close to Bethsaida, so I'm not sure. I mean, there could be a considerable number of people, but we know more than 5,000. So if you assume even just a low percentage of women and children came, it could be 6,000, 7,000 easy. So, and of course, what were they fed with? The loaves and the fish, right? That's the obvious answer. That's what He fed them with. Now, when Jesus had the loaves and fish, what was the first thing He did? He blessed, right? Let's see. Let me read this right. He blessed and broke and gave the loaves, right? So He blessed. And we think of that as, the way we think of it as saying the blessing, right? Let's see. So He was trusting God to make it enough, right? He's setting this example for us. He blessed it. He was trusting God to make that food enough. And sometimes we need to trust God that way, that He has given us enough, that whatever we have is enough, and that He will give us more as we need it. Now, an example of the blessing that Jesus could have said, based on traditional Jewish prayers, and I looked this up on I think they called it a Shabbat or something website, or I forget I may get that wrong. I'm not a Jewish person. But they had several different blessings they gave for different things. Like in this example, this first one is a blessing for the bread. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. And then fish and some other things, they fall into this kind of miscellaneous category, which they use this blessing for. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, by whose word all things came to be. So, and they could combine them up, like with a meal like this where you have bread and fish, you could kind of combine that up and do, blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth and by whose word all things came to be. You could do some combination there like that. But this is just their type of traditional prayer. He might have said something like this. I'm not saying that's definitely what he said. This is just some examples. Yes?
As far as this miracle, obviously it's a miracle, and we can't explain like how it happened other than by the power of God. But in my mind, I keep trying to visualize like what did these baskets just sort of like puff up with more and more, or did they divide? He says he divided them and broke them up, and I just can't wrap my mind around it. Of course, that's the whole point, I guess.
Yep.
God's power, but
I think I had something on that somewhere, but yeah, there's no explanation that tells us what it looked like or how that was working. Was the bread and the fish just stay? Anyway, we don't have a record of that. So I mean, they don't mention that. So I thought of that too. It would have been kind of cool to hear how that looked or what they saw or witnessed, but they don't mention that. They just mention that he gives them the food to give to the people. So yes, Donna.
I envision it like a magician. They start with one pancake and then they pull out hundreds from their plate. I mean, it just keeps going.
Well, that is one way to envision it, and that's fine. We don't know, but he did something like that. I mean, he did something to keep producing food, right? So. All right. So, let's see. We talked about that. All right. So. But anyway, this was just an example of blessing. Jesus being with a lot of people and it being maybe a traditional thing. I think he could have said one of the traditional blessings, but we don't know how those may have changed over time or anything. So this is just an example of that. So who did Jesus give the food to?
The disciples.
Right. He gave the food to the disciples. And the disciples gave the food to the people. And this is how the Lord works through us even now. If you think about the gospel, if you think about anything concerning the Lord in the Bible, he gives it to us and we are to give it to others who don't have it, right? Yes?
I was kind of thinking about that in my recent lesson on Saul. I didn't make this point, but it's the same point you're making. Jesus appeared to Saul.
Yeah.
But he's like, go to Damascus and then someone will tell you what to do. Ananias, and he appointed Ananias, and Ananias taught him the word. And so, you might wonder, well, why didn't Jesus just tell him what to do? Well, he has us do that. He has people teach the gospel.
Yeah. See, that's a good point there too. Yeah, because Jesus could have done it. He was there, but he sent Paul to Ananias to do that. So yeah, and to baptize him. Yeah, so that's the way Jesus works. That's the way the Lord works, is through us. He gives to us so that we can give to others. He could always do it himself, but he wants to work through us. He wants us to be a part of this. So how much did everyone eat?
They were full.
Till they were full, right? So it said they were filled. They didn't just eat a little. If you remember our other account a few minutes ago, they actually ate till they were filled. And then how much was left over?
12 baskets.
12 baskets, right? 12 baskets full. Now that 12 could be representative of the tribes or the apostles, or it could be, I don't believe there's many coincidences. That's my problem. So I think things mean something, but it could be symbolic of something, or it may just be what happened. So, but it does represent how abundantly the Lord supplies for us and gives to us in this life. And this whole event shows Jesus, again, his compassion for the people, that he didn't want to send them away. He wanted to go ahead and give them something. So, okay, and we talked about that. All right, let's look at Mark's account. Chapter 6, verses 39 through 43. Then he commanded them to... Yeah. Okay, he's talking to the apostles, the disciples. Then he commanded them to make them all sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in ranks, in hundreds and in 50s. And when he had taken the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, blessed and broke the loaves, and gave them to his disciples to set before them. Again, one of these thems, his disciples to set before them, that's the multitude, the crowd. And the 2 fish he divided among them all. So they all ate and were filled. And they took up 12 baskets full of fragments and of the fish. Pardon me. Now those who had eaten the loaves were about 5,000 men. So, I guess, what's the difference or the thing that's kind of added here in Mark's account that we didn't know from Matthew?
The way they sat down.
Right, the way they were ordered when they were sat down. They sat down in ranks of hundreds and 50s. Okay? So, why would he do that? Why would he have them sit like that?
I think I've heard some make the point that there's an analogy of this to the children of Israel in the wilderness, and that Moses, I think, was told to have some of the children of Israel organized in a similar way, and he has rulers over hundreds and 50s.
He did do that type of thing with them in the wilderness. Moses did have them organized, and remember, they had an organized way that they made camp and broke camp, so could be part of that. Did you have something, Shirley?
I was just going to say that if you have small groups like in 50s and 100 instead of one big massive crowd of 5,000, maybe he was making sure that everyone partook.
Right. That makes sense too.
Missed.
Yeah. I think it was. I mean, from a very practical standpoint, it was easier to distribute the food if you had some. If you had just a big mob, it would be hard to get between everybody and make sure everyone got something. So I think that's a good point. Just from a practical standpoint, that's what I was thinking too. But that is a thoughtful idea too about that relating back to the Old Testament. So if you notice here, this is just an artist's idea of this. How there's room to walk around in between the people. You know, this probably isn't perfect, but this is just to give you a general idea that they would be able to distribute the food a little easier, a little better, because they're not all packed in tightly, making it difficult. So, and here was my note about how hard it would be. It would be nice to have some sort of idea about how this looked when Jesus was breaking the food apart. Yeah. So let's look at Luke's account, chapter 9, verses 14 through 17. For there were about 5,000 men. Then he said to his disciples, make them sit down in groups of 50. And they did so, and made them all sit down. Then he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he blessed and broke them, and gave them to the disciples to set before the multitude. So they all ate and were filled, and 12 baskets of the leftover fragments were taken up by them. I don't really see anything different here. If you see anything, let me know. To me, it's a...
Do you look up anything in the other ones?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so.
I wasn't sure.
Yeah, he lifted up. Yes. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so let's look at John's account. Then Jesus said, Make the people sit down. Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, in number about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples to those sitting down, and likewise of the fish, as much as they wanted. Now there's slightly different, as much as they wanted. So definitely more than just some food. So when they were filled, he said to his disciples, gather up the fragments that remain, so that nothing is lost. Therefore they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves which were left over by those who had eaten. So what does John tell us about this area? It's grassy. Maybe that's good for a picnic, maybe, if you know. Yes, surely.
A question, what is Jesus trying to stress to us about having all the gathering of the 12 baskets? What would they have done with that food?
Well,
I mean, I'm wondering, there's a reason why we are told that. What would it be?
well, this was a blessing from God, and he did not want to waste that. And that was the immediate thing that came to me. We should not waste any of the blessings we have from God. And so Jesus told them to gather this up because this was precious. This, if you think about it, this is miracle food, right?
Right.
I mean, this is definitely a big deal. Now, we don't know what happens to this food, which is unfortunate. But Jesus had them gather it up. Maybe he gave it to the poor, or maybe, I don't know. Did you have something more?
Well, yes, just thinking about that. Jesus performed a miracle there. Well, he could have also performed that miracle to just cover what all those people needed and nothing left over. I mean, he could have done that.
That's true. That's true. But this...
And, okay, I'm sitting here thinking, is that why I eat leftovers?
Well, that could be. We don't like to waste things, right? Because everything we get really is precious and from God. Yeah, Matt? And then Carolyn?
Maybe it speaks to God's abundance, I guess.
Right.
One thought, but he does bring it up again in, spoiler alert, in chapter 16. There's a different discussion. He said, don't you guys remember the 12?
Yeah, he does remind them that they had that. Yeah.
He is trying to bring some kind of lesson. I'm not completely sure what it is either.
And I think too, it's bringing out how we can trust the Lord when we ask for something. He's not just going to give us maybe the bare minimum, but he's going to really take care of us.
Yes, he does. He does really take care of us, and he does. He gives us more than enough. He is an abundantly compassionate and giving Lord. That's the lesson I take from that, is that he gives us more than enough so that we can share with others. Yes, Shirley.
Well, the abundance that we have, that we're so bountifully blessed with, we are to share with other people, and it doesn't have to be food, it can be anything.
Right. It can be time, food,
So,
energy. Yeah.
There's a lot of lessons in this. You know?
Yes. Yes. And go ahead, Donna.
Well, the number 12 and also the number 7, which is the other one,
Uh-huh.
are God's numbers.
Yeah. 12 a lot of times comes up, representing, and it is God's number. You're right. God's number, 7 and 12.
7 were spoken a lot about in
Yeah.
Revelations and the churches and everything. And I think there is, Shirley's right, there is a significance there that we don't get about them mentioning that there were 12 baskets and then in the other one, 7 baskets.
It has something to do with God's perfection and this, this idea. We think of that number 7, for instance, being perfect. And then 12, if we think of 12, there's 12 of the showbread before God. There's the 12 relates a lot to Israel and the tribes, but then when we come to Christianity and the Lord, we can relate that to the apostles and the new kind of Christian tribes, if you want to say that. It's not exactly, but it's an idea, yes.
Maybe it's as simple as if someone missed the point, but hey, this was a miracle.
Right.
You missed the point. It's almost like puts an exclamation point at the end, like, and there were 12 baskets at the end.
Yeah.
12 is one of those numbers, one of God's numbers, and there were exactly 12. So if you missed the point that it's a miracle, look, and also there's 12 baskets just to
Yep.
show that God's hand in all this.
Yes, this is, this is definitely a miracle, a miraculous thing. And I see that I have ran us very late. But God gives us abundantly all the time, every day, all our lives. He gives us so much, and we have so much, like Shirley was saying, we have so much to share with people. And we are just so greatly blessed by Him. And it's so wonderful to live this life knowing our Lord and our Savior, and knowing that He does care about us. He has this great compassion for us, that He supplies everything we need abundantly, more than what we need. And so this evening, I just want us to think about that as kind of a short invitation here, that if you were to have any need this evening, anything that you need prayers or anything for, we'd be happy to help you with that. And if you do have a need, if the Lord is always here for us, that's another thing. He's always here for us. He cares about us so much. And if you do have any kind of need this evening, if you would come forward and let us know what that is, we would be happy to pray with you and help you with that. So just come forward while we stand and sing.